The company CEO dismissed a single father. Then she made one decision. Just 5 minutes later, she lost her own position instead. "You're fired. Leave your ID badge on the desk and walk out of my company." The harsh words echoed across the quiet warehouse as every employee froze in place. Dozens of workers turned to look at Ethan Carter, a dedicated single father who had spent the last 8 years giving everything he had to the company. His work uniform was covered with grease after loading trucks since early morning. But the pain on his face came from something much deeper than physical exhaustion. He wasn't worried about himself. His thoughts were fixed on his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, waiting at home and depending on him for everything. Without another paycheck, he had no idea how he would pay the rent or afford the asthma medicine she needed every month. As the CEO crossed her arms with a cold and emotionless expression, Ethan quietly removed his company ID badge. Instead of arguing, shouting, or begging for another chance, he calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made one short phone call. 5 minutes later, everything inside that company changed forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is more powerful than authority and that every person deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment below, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Beyond Kindness for more emotional and inspiring stories. Everyone inside the warehouse expected Ethan to react with anger. Some believed he would beg to keep his job. Others thought he would threaten to sue the company. Instead, he simply nodded, thanked the coworkers who had stood beside him throughout the years, and slowly walked toward the parking lot. His old rusty pickup truck looked almost as worn out as he did. Dark rain clouds slowly gathered above as Ethan stood beside the truck, staring quietly at a faded photograph taped to the dashboard. It showed him smiling proudly beside his daughter Lily on her very first day of school. Ever since his wife had passed away from cancer 4 years earlier, Ethan had accepted every overtime shift he could get. He had missed birthdays, skipped family vacations, and ignored his own health simply to give Lily a safe and stable life. Back inside the warehouse, employees quietly whispered to one another. Every person there knew Ethan wasn't lazy or careless. Whenever a machine stopped working, he stayed late to repair it. Whenever another worker became sick, he willingly covered their shift without complaining. He was always the first employee to arrive every morning, and usually the very last person to leave at night. But the company's newly appointed CEO, Victoria Hayes, believed profits and numbers mattered far more than loyalty and people. After taking control of the business 6 months earlier, she had dismissed dozens of experienced and faithful employees to impress investors by reducing operating costs. Earlier that same morning, a shipping delay had caused one of the company's biggest clients to file a serious complaint. Without asking a single question or investigating what had actually happened, Victoria blamed Ethan simply because he supervised the loading dock. She never learned that the delay had really been caused by a software failure at the company's headquarters. Her decision was immediate, public, and deeply humiliating. Outside the warehouse, Ethan slowly dialed a phone number he had not used in years. He spoke only a few calm words before ending the call. Then he leaned quietly against his truck, folded his arms, and patiently waited. Inside the executive offices, Victoria proudly told her management team that removing emotional employees was necessary for success. She believed leadership meant showing no weakness. Her assistant even congratulated her for acting quickly. Only 5 minutes later, everything changed. Exactly 5 minutes later, every phone in the executive office began ringing. The receptionist looked confused. The human resources director suddenly received an urgent email marked Priority 1. The company's legal department rushed toward the CEO's office. No one understood what was happening. Victoria opened the email expecting another client report. Instead, her confident smile disappeared. Her face turned pale. The message informed her that members of the company's board of directors were arriving immediately for an emergency meeting. Attendance was mandatory. The notice also stated that the complaint concerned her leadership decisions and recent employee terminations. She stared at the screen in disbelief. The promise made years before. Across the parking lot, Ethan quietly watched several luxury black vehicles enter the company's front gate. He knew exactly why they were there. Years earlier, before his wife became ill, Ethan had helped build the company alongside its founder, Richard Lawson. Richard wasn't just his former employer. He had become one of Ethan's closest friends. When Richard retired because of poor health, he remained chairman of the board while hiring Victoria as CEO. Before leaving, Richard had given Ethan one simple promise. If this company ever forgets the people who built it, call me. Ethan never imagined he would need to make that call. Today, he finally did. The board arrives. As the board members entered the building, nervous managers hurried through the hallways. Employees who had watched Ethan being fired only minutes earlier now looked through the warehouse windows, feeling that something unusual was about to happen. Victoria walked into the boardroom with confidence, believing she could easily explain the situation. She had no idea that her greatest mistake was not simply firing an employee. It was firing the one man who had helped build the heart of the company. Silence filled the boardroom. The boardroom, usually filled with confidence and polished presentations, had become painfully quiet. Every executive sat stiffly in their chairs while the members of the board entered one after another. At the front walked Richard Lawson, the retired founder whose reputation had been built not only on business success, but also on the way he treated people. Even after retirement, employees still spoke about him with deep respect. Unlike the new leadership, Richard knew nearly every long-serving worker by name. Victoria stood to greet him with a practiced smile, but Richard walked past her without returning it. He placed a thin folder on the conference table and slowly looked around the room with disappointment instead of anger. The silence that followed felt far more uncomfortable than shouting ever could. A 30-second phone call. Earlier that morning, Ethan's brief phone call had lasted less than 30 seconds. He never asked for revenge. He simply explained what had happened and reminded Richard of the promise he had made years before. Richard immediately requested security footage, internal emails, and the performance records of the employee who had just been dismissed. What he discovered disturbed him deeply. The reports showed that Ethan had received the highest performance ratings in the entire operations department for 6 straight years. He had never received a disciplinary warning. Customer feedback repeatedly praised his honesty, reliability, and leadership. During several emergencies, he had personally stayed overnight to keep deliveries moving, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then another report appeared. The shipping delay that Victoria had blamed on Ethan had actually been caused by a failed software update approved by senior management. Ethan had tried to report the problem hours before the delay happened, but his emails had gone unanswered. One question no one could answer. Richard slowly closed the folder. He looked directly at Victoria and asked one question that nobody in the room could answer. Did anyone investigate before destroying a loyal employee's livelihood? No one spoke. Human Resources admitted they had been ordered to process the termination immediately without conducting any review. Several department managers quietly admitted they had warned Victoria that Ethan was innocent, but she refused to listen. The room grew heavier with every passing minute. The truth about the company. Richard then requested another document. It listed every experienced employee who had resigned or been fired during Victoria's 6 months as leader. Productivity had fallen. Customer complaints had doubled. Employee turnover had reached the highest level in company history. Millions of dollars had been lost, not because workers had failed the company, but because leadership had failed its people. Richard finally stood. He reminded everyone that companies are not built by impressive offices or expensive suits. They are built by ordinary people who arrive before sunrise, miss family dinners, and sacrifice their comfort so the business can succeed. The board's final decision. Then he announced the board's unanimous decision. Victoria Hayes was removed as CEO effective immediately. The same security officer who had escorted Ethan from the building only minutes earlier was now asked to escort Victoria out. As she walked through the warehouse carrying her belongings, employees watched in complete silence. No one celebrated. No one applauded. They simply realized how quickly power can disappear when it is used without compassion. A new beginning for Ethan. Outside, Ethan had already started the engine of his old pickup truck. He had no idea the decision had already been made. His phone rang. It was Richard. Instead of offering revenge, Richard offered respect. He personally apologized for everything that had happened and asked Ethan to return, not as a warehouse supervisor, but as director of operations, with a salary that would finally reflect everything he had given the company over the years. Ethan sat quietly behind the steering wheel. For a moment, he looked at Lily's picture taped to the dashboard. Tears slowly filled his eyes. He accepted the position, but only after making one request. He asked Richard to rehire every employee who had been unfairly dismissed under the previous leadership. He said no family should suffer because of someone else's poor decision.